In MoneyWatch, businesses across the country are experiencing operational chaos as new data shows a record number of people quitting their jobs. According to the Labor Department, 4.3 million people quit their jobs in the month of August. The industries hit the hardest include food service, retail, and healthcare. With more on this, Aimee Picchi joins us now to talk about this. So Aimee, good to see you. Help us make sense of what's happening, why people are quitting their jobs in such historic numbers.
Yeah, it was really remarkable. This data was from August, so it's a little bit delayed. But what we saw was 3% of all workers quit their jobs in August. And by comparison, normally this rate is about between 1% to 2%. So that's a huge increase. And you've probably heard the term the Great Resignation, and that's what we're seeing right now. There are a couple things that were happening in August that economists say really sparked this Great Resignation. Number one is you have the Delta variant really going into full swing across the U.S. in August. And that made an impact on workers. We started to see in census data around the same time that more workers were saying they weren't working because they were worried about getting COVID. And it's interesting if you look at the data that, as you mentioned, Vlad, a lot of these people who quit were in food service. They worked on the front lines. They are worried about getting COVID, and especially the Delta variant. So economists say that is one of the main reasons why we saw that sharp uptick in people deciding to leave their jobs. The other reason is childcare in school. A lot of schools were going back into service in August, and we saw a lot of quarantines. We saw a lot of outbreaks, and that makes it really hard for parents, especially moms with children, to go to work. If they can't plan on regular childcare, regular school, it just makes it a lot more difficult to stay in the workforce. So that's the second reason why a lot of economists say August saw 4.3 million people quitting their jobs.
The professor that coined that phrase, the Great Resignation, is a professor from Texas A&M. He also talked about burnout, and you sort of touched on that when it came to childcare. The burnout of working at home, but also the burnout if you had to work through this pandemic, which brings me to the industries most impacted. We talked about, the hospitality industry, but also healthcare. And I would imagine we're seeing an uptick in people quitting who have been on the front lines in medical care for the last 19 months, and they are just sort of have come to the end of their rope.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing this. We're hearing it at MoneyWatch. We talk with workers who are experiencing a lot of stress on the job. It's become a very stressful time for workers who deal with other people, retail, restaurants, healthcare, because of things like mask mandates and people who are angry about those things. And so workers are having to deal with situations that they didn't have to deal with before the pandemic, and that is leading to burnout. You're also seeing some people saying, you know what, I'm working at a restaurant making $10 an hour. I can get a job at a warehouse making $15, $20 an hour where I don't really have to deal with people. I'm not dealing with frustrations, complaints, and that is proving to be appealing to some workers. So, that's the other thing that we're seeing is not just a resignation, but a shifting in where people want to work. So that's something to keep an eye on as well.
One of the things, Aimee, that I'm curious about is we haven't faced something like this in over 100 years, right? Going back to the influenza epidemic and pandemic of 1918. And I wonder if the way that we look at the economy and the way that we look at the labor market will have to be redefined by economists and analysts going forward. Because, away from the politics, you will hear politicians either suggesting that it's the benefits that people were able to accrue over the pandemic that has caused them to not want to go back to work. You'll hear other people say, no, it's because they weren't given enough, they weren't given enough relief. But away from that, I don't know how many people, and this is anecdotal, so that's why I think that needs to be a real study of this, but people that I've spoken to that have said, you know what? This has redefined how I look at life. Life is too short to make it all about the rat race or all about dollars and cents or all about, this job that I trudge to every day. Of course, there are people that work because they need to put food on the table and send their kids to school. But there's also a significant portion of the economy, I'm guessing, that has also chosen if they are able to, if they have the means to, opt out of what they were doing before. And just because they've left their jobs in healthcare or in food service or in retail doesn't mean that they're not going to re-enter the job market at some point once they figure out what it is that they want to do. I wonder if that's been looked at or studied at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so far this is anecdotal, but you're absolutely right that this is happening. We're seeing a lot of people reevaluate what they want out of work. And, some people are staying in their jobs, but taking mental health leaves. I talked with a therapist yesterday who works with a lot of professionals, and she's seeing an increase in this. So it's people taking time out because they are burned out, they're stressed out, and they're trying to recalibrate and figure out what they want out of their careers. Now, Vlad, you mentioned the pandemic unemployment, because that was a big debate during the pandemic is, are these extra payments with $600 a month and $300 a month, is that keeping people out of the workforce? Well, that all ended in early September. We've had a month with none of this extra support, and people still aren't coming back to the market or the job market in the way that economists had expected. So, after a month of this data, economists are saying, okay, hold on, we need to rethink this. Maybe there are some other things going on. And number one is health concerns that people don't want to risk their lives for a job that they think might not pay enough for that. So people are reevaluating, how much they earn, and is it worth putting their lives on the line if they are working in jobs that put them at higher risk for COVID. So absolutely right. I think this is something that's going to be on the minds of a lot of economists going forward.
And, the pandemic, too, may have delayed people who were actually planning on perhaps resigning a year and a half ago, but then the pandemic hit and they kind of put it off, or there was uncertainty, so you don't want to make that leap, and then, they decide, well, we're going for it. But speaking of the pandemic, the other thing that we often hear from critics of mandates is, the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. That's a factor. People don't like being told that they have to get this vaccine in order to keep working. I don't know. Is that something that's coming up in the numbers as well?
So far, no. It's interesting because when we've gotten some numbers from companies that have put in vaccine mandates, there are some people that they've had to fire because they refuse to get the vaccines, but it's actually a really small number. So far, this doesn't seem to be popping up in the data. It is something to keep an eye on, though. So I think, keep an eye on that. Let's see how that turns out. But so far, no, it's not significant enough to influence the bigger picture numbers. But the problem is that the labor market is so tight right now that really employers need all the workers they can get. There just aren't enough. There are 10.4 million job openings and 7.7 million out of work people. So even if all those people got jobs, we still have almost 3 million open jobs. So you can see that there's a real mismatch right now in the economy. So, on the margin, I guess you could say everything makes a little bit of a difference, but so far those numbers aren't big enough to really make a major impact in the job numbers.
So are these resignation rates providing some kind of leverage for workers with their employers who may have decided not to quit, for example?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great time to be a worker. It's definitely shifted to putting power in the hands of workers. We're seeing employers increase wages, we're seeing bonuses, we're seeing more benefits. And employers don't want to let go of the workers they have. Unfortunately, what's happening, though, is that employers are asking their workers to do more simply because they can't hire enough people to fill those open positions. But economists say this is a good time to ask for more. You have leverage, you have bargaining power. You can it's much easier right now to find a job elsewhere than it has been. So use that to your advantage. Employers, like we said, have those resources. They really want to keep workers. So this is definitely a good time for workers to use their bargaining power.
It's all really interesting stuff, Aimee. Thank you so much.
Thank you.